In 1992, a bankrupt British brand walked into the Isle of Man TT and humiliated Honda's million-dollar factory team. No pistons, no valves, just a rotary engine that sounded like a jet and shattered everything riders thought they knew about power. Steve Hislop rode that Norton like a man possessed, beating giants who never saw it coming. But behind the glory was something darker. Within months, the same industry that praised Norton moved to bury it. Rules changed, engines vanished, and the truth faded into rumor. Tonight, we uncover the shocking story they never wanted you to remember. The race they weren't supposed to win. Honda and Yamaha ruled the island, their million-dollar machines tearing through the mist with the precision of factory warfare until 1992. Every turn, every lap, every record, already spoken for. Norton on paper didn't even belong there. They were bankrupt, bleeding cash, a ghost of British engineering pride. Their factory had gone quiet years before. But that year, something strange happened in the paddock, a sound that didn't fit. It wasn't the familiar rasp of a four-cylinder Honda. It was higher, sharper, almost alien. Mechanics stopped mid-step to look. The smell of castrol hung thick in the cold air, but beneath it was something else, something metallic and raw. They called it the howl from nowhere. The bike came out of a tiny garage near Shenstone, built by men who had no corporate funding and no marketing department, just obsession. When the rotary Norton fired up, its tone was wrong in all the right ways. It didn't cough or idle. It hovered like a turbine waiting for ignition. Reporters said it wouldn't last a lap. Honda laughed until Norton started gaining. Hislop crossed the line first, defeating giants with a bike that shouldn't exist. The crowd froze, stunned. A bankrupt British brand had just humiliated Japan's might on the world's toughest stage. But behind that miracle win wasn't luck or magic. It was a machine that shouldn't have worked, a machine engineers swore was impossible until it started breaking their dynos in half. The engine that didn't belong. Most engines breathe in, explode, and exhale. The Norton rotary didn't. It inhaled and burned in one continuous motion, a spinning triangle sealed inside a perfect oval, rotating with the rhythm of a turbine. No pistons, no rods, just motion so smooth it blurred the line between combustion and flight. While Honda spent fortunes perfecting four-cylinder precision, Norton had built something from another dimension. The rotary was smaller, lighter, and infinitely stranger. It didn't thump or growl, it sang. Its twin rotors produced a wail that sounded less like an engine and more like an aircraft at takeoff. To engineers raised on piston logic, it was heresy. To the riders who heard it, it was haunting. Brian Crichton, a self-taught mechanic turned engineer, had spent his nights tinkering with discarded police bikes in a corner of the factory. What he built on that bench became the heart of a revolution. The 700cc rotary unleashed 130 horsepower with terrifying smoothness. Honda's engineers couldn't comprehend it. They weren't beaten by an engine, but by an idea. In 1992, that idea shattered illusions, proving real genius still lives in Greece, not boardrooms. But every miracle demands a sacrifice, and inside Norton's crumbling walls, the victory that should have saved them was already lighting the fuse that would destroy them. If you're hooked by how this forgotten British engine outsmarted Honda's billion-dollar machines, drop a like right now and subscribe to our channel. The man in the workshop. Brian Crichton wasn't a corporate engineer. He was a mechanic who had spent years fixing Norton's underperforming police bikes. He'd seen every weakness of the rotary design up close. While executives were worrying about payroll, he was sketching airflow patterns on the back of receipts and experimenting in a converted garden shed. His workshop wasn't glamorous. The roof leaked. The floor was stained with decades of oil. The lighting was a single buzzing fluorescent tube that cast long shadows over tool benches stacked with spare parts. But in that space, something remarkable began to form. Crichton realized that if the rotary's heat could be controlled, its efficiency and power could surpass any piston engine. Night after night, he refined the police engine into a twin-rotor beast hitting 170 miles per hour. When it roared, disbelief turned to awe. Crichton's rebellion wasn't against Japan, it was against surrender, proving British engineering still had fire left. Yet what began in a shed soon reached the most dangerous course in the world, where every mistake is paid for in flesh and metal. Check the description for the gear and tools riders actually trust. Built for the road, not the showroom. The day the island went silent. The Isle of Man. TT isn't a racetrack. It's a public road turned battlefield, a place where skill and courage matter as much as horsepower. In 1992, Steve Hislop climbed onto Norton's Rotary-powered racer and stared down legends riding for Honda and Yamaha. When the starter's flag dropped, the world held its breath. From the first miles, the difference was unmistakable. The Rotary didn't snarl, it sang, a smooth, piercing note that cut through the roar of conventional engines. Spectators said it sounded like a jet, not a motorcycle. As the laps unfolded, Hislop's times defied logic. The Norton glided where others fought, its power band a seamless curve that carried him through corners faster than anyone believed possible. Fogarty pushed hard, but the clock crowned Norton king. A shed-built British engine had humiliated Japan's giants. Yet beneath the cheers and burnt oil, the victory rang hollow. The Rotary's triumph wasn't celebrated. It was marked for retaliation, and the knives were already drawn. Because every revolution makes enemies, and what came next would test the limits of innovation, loyalty, and survival. Power that shouldn't exist. When Norton's Rotary engine first hit the dyno, the numbers didn't seem real. From a displacement barely 588 cubic centimeters, it produced 135 horsepower, power levels that challenged 1,000 cubic centimeter superbikes from Japan. The torque curve wasn't a curve at all. It was a straight line of thrust, smooth and relentless. The dyno operator later said he could balance a coin on the tank while the engine screamed at 10,000 revolutions per minute. That wasn't power. It was perfection wrapped in danger. The engine's compact size meant weight distribution unlike anything else in racing. With so little reciprocating mass, throttle response was instantaneous, almost violent. Riders described it as feeling telepathic, as if the machine could sense their thoughts before they twisted the grip. Yet that precision came with a warning. Even in test runs, the mechanics wore gloves just to handle the bike's frame after a few laps. On the dyno, the engineers grinned at the readings. In the pit lane, they whispered. Something this powerful, this smooth, and this unpredictable couldn't exist without a cost. The question was no longer could Norton win, but could their creation be controlled long enough to survive victory? And soon, they would discover that when an engine stops fighting physics, it starts fighting the rest of the motorcycle. The beast fights back. The Rotary was a marvel in theory, but on the track it behaved like a living creature, beautiful one moment, vicious the next. Riders said the bike handled perfectly at half pace but turned violent under full power. The lightweight engine made the front end twitch, the rear tire clawing for traction. The moment the throttle opened, the frame twisted, the suspension screamed, and the entire motorcycle tried to escape its own limits. The chassis flexed like a bowstring, snapping the rider from one edge of control to the other. At high speed, the bike developed a strange side-to-side vibration that even veteran racers couldn't predict. On one test day, a rider came back pale, saying it felt like the machine was breathing through him. The heat from the engine's core reached temperatures so high that the aluminum bodywork began to discolor. The seat itself grew warm enough to burn through leathers after a long run. Engineers tried everything, but the bike kept reminding them that innovation never gives gifts for free. Every lap at race pace was a negotiation between brilliance and disaster. Yet even with the danger, the Rotary kept winning. It had become an outlaw masterpiece, an engine that ignored every convention and demanded total respect. But while the riders battled heat and physics, another fight was starting in quieter rooms. The Boardroom War. Inside Norton's modest headquarters, victory didn't bring peace. It brought politics. As the trophies piled up, so did the tension between the engineers who had built the Rotary and the managers who now wanted control over it. The racing department, led by Brian Crichton, had proven the impossible could be done. But to executives, that success was leveraged to sell road bikes, not fund further experimentation. The new leadership wanted Norton to look professional, to appear modern. Crichton didn't care about appearance. He wanted to win. The clash was inevitable. One engineer fighting for innovation, a boardroom fighting for order. Arguments spilled into the corridors. At one point, a cost analyst tried to cancel a parts order that Crichton had placed out of his own pocket. The collapse began when a former Honda executive took over, switching Dunlop tires to Michelin and erasing years of data. Crichton called it sabotage. They called it progress. He quit, forming his own team, and Norton's revolutionary spirit walked out with him. Yet even outside the factory, the fight was far from over. Because when innovation can't be stopped in the garage, it's often stopped somewhere else, the rulebook rebellion. By 1993, the racing world had seen enough of Norton's defiance. The Japanese factories were furious. Their massive budgets and wind tunnel labs had been humiliated by an engine built in a converted shed. They wanted revenge, not on the racetrack, but in the committees that decided what counted as fair competition. The problem was displacement. A rotary engine doesn't have cylinders, so comparing its 588 cubic centimeters to a piston engine was complicated. For years, the governing bodies had allowed Norton to compete under arbitrary equivalency formulas, but once the victories started piling up, those formulas changed. Suddenly, the Rotary was ruled too efficient, too powerful, too unconventional. Safety concerns appeared overnight. Inspectors who had ignored those issues for seasons now treated them as urgent threats. Officials forced restrictors, questioned its very definition, and rewrote rules until the Rotary couldn't breathe. Crichton still won, but the outcome was fixed. By 1994, it wasn't banned, just erased. Yet even after the rules closed the door, the echoes of that betrayal lingered in workshops, race memories, and the hearts of those who saw what true innovation looked like before it was buried. The riders who tamed the fire. Every revolution demands its soldiers, and Norton's were men who trusted instinct over logic. Steve Hislop, Trevor Nation, and Steve Spray knew the Rotary wasn't a normal motorcycle. It was a weapon that could betray its rider as easily as it could make him a legend. When Hislop climbed onto that roaring machine at the Isle of Man, he wasn't chasing glory, he was wrestling chaos. He once described it as riding the wind through a keyhole, and that wasn't exaggeration. The throttle didn't just open power, it opened another world, one where every input mattered, and every mistake had a price measured in skin and bone. Their leather suits told the story. Spray recalled that the bike felt alive, humming with energy, even at idle, its smoothness both seductive and sinister. The Rotary didn't lurch or growl like a V-twin. It surged forward in a seamless rush, daring the rider to push harder each lap. But at those speeds, bravery blurred into madness. Hislop admitted that the Rotary was the most terrifying machine he ever controlled, and the most addictive. They were proving that raw talent and courage could still beat corporate dominance. When the crowd roared, they weren't just cheering for speed, they were cheering for defiance. Yet beneath the applause lay an unspoken truth. Every lap could have been their last. And while the riders faced danger on the course, another kind of death was happening far from the track. The factory that went quiet. When Norton's racing glory faded, the lights inside the Leicestershire plant began to flicker out. What had once been a symbol of British resilience turned into a monument of silence. The machines that had hummed with purpose now stood idle. Half-finished frames gathered dust beside engines waiting for assembly that would never come. The smell of cutting oil still lingered in the air, but no hands were left to use it. Workers filed out one by one, carrying toolboxes and pride that no paycheck could replace. For years, these men and women had built motorcycles not for profit, but for pride. Norton wasn't just a brand, It was a part of their identity. When the shutdown came, there were no speeches, no goodbyes, just the slow realization that the dream had ended. The factory floor grew colder each day until even the pigeons abandoned the rafters. Some workers built Japanese bikes, others never touched tools again. When the factory locked for good, only echoes remained. The death of craftsmanship that once believed it could defy empires. But ideas don't stay buried forever. And even across oceans, traces of Norton's rebellion began showing up in the unlikeliest of places. If this story reminded you what real engineering courage looks like, hit subscribe and stay tuned, because the next chapter of motorcycle history we uncover might just change how you see every engine built since that fateful race. The ghost in Japan's machines. After the Rotary disappeared from competition, engineers from across the industry quietly dissected its remains. They had dismissed it for years as impractical, yet within a decade, its fingerprints appeared everywhere. The smooth throttle response that defined modern sport bikes? That came from studying the Rotary's balanced combustion. The compact engine layouts that allowed tighter frames and improved handling? Another borrowed lesson. Even the whisper-quiet idol of luxury touring bikes carried echoes of the Rotary's seamless firing sequence. In Japan, where precision was an obsession, teams of engineers pored over blueprints and surviving race footage. They weren't trying to copy Norton outright. They were learning what made it different. The Japanese approach to innovation had always been to absorb and improve, and that's exactly what happened here. Poetic, really. The companies that buried Norton absorbed its soul, repackaged its genius, and sold it back in chrome. To most, the link is invisible, but every smooth modern engine still whispers the ghostly echo of that defiant British Rotary that once humiliated giants. And before that ghost faded completely, the Rotary had one more chance to speak for itself. One final race, one last storm before silence. The final lap. 1994 became the Rotary's farewell tour. Brian Crichton, now running his own small team, refused to let the technology die quietly. With limited funding and a handful of loyal mechanics, he tuned the engine to perfection. The bike roared back to life under the hands of Ian Simpson, a young rider with something to prove. Against factory-backed giants from Ducati and Kawasaki, Crichton's shed-built machine looked outmatched, but looks deceived. When the season began, the Rotary hit like lightning. Its brutal acceleration silenced skeptics as Simpson's confidence soared. By season's end, Simpson was champion. It felt like rebirth, but history called it the last stand. The victory faded fast. New rules banned the Rotary under safety, though politics wrote the verdict. Crichton's team dissolved, their miracle outlawed. Yet legends linger. Riders still whisper of the year courage outran money. The last time a British engine humiliated giants and proved truth can win, briefly, before power rewrites it. And though the engine stopped, the questions never did. Questions about what was lost, what was stolen, and what kind of industry fears its own brilliance. When the giants struck back, the celebration of Norton's triumph was still echoing across the Isle of Man when the quiet revenge began. Inside boardrooms in Tokyo, Hamamatsu, and Munich, executives gathered under the cold hum of fluorescent lights, analyzing lap data and race reports. The problem wasn't performance, it was precedent. If a bankrupt British company could beat multi-million-dollar factories using backyard ingenuity, the myth of corporate invincibility would crumble. That could not be allowed. Manufacturers met behind closed doors, masking panic with words like safety and clarification. The Rotary had humiliated them. Dependent on their money, officials rewrote rules line by line, burying Norton's advantage under polite language about fairness, equivalency, and technical definitions. Competition turned to containment. The Rotary threatened not markets, but control. Racing became corporate theater, where profit outranked performance. New rule books replaced British flags, and Norton's revolution was buried, not by speed or failure, but by the quiet power of bureaucracy and fear. And while the paperwork secured the empire, the people who built those engines faced a different kind of reckoning. The workers left behind. When Norton fell, it wasn't just a company that died, it was a way of life. Across Britain, the collapse of small motorcycle manufacturers mirrored a national pattern. Workshops that had once thundered with hand tools and pride grew silent. The men who'd built engines with their bare hands found themselves stacking shelves or applying for unemployment. The same government that once celebrated British engineering now encouraged outsourcing and imports. Factories that had shaped generations of craftsmen turned into warehouses for foreign parts. Streets near the plants emptied. The pubs that once overflowed with laughter and oil-stained hands became quiet memorials to an era of calloused palms and honest work. In towns like Wolverhampton and Leicester, the sound of a bike engine on a Sunday morning became a ghost of memory. Fathers who had once brought home prototypes and test bikes for their sons could now only afford used imports from Japan. The collapse reached beyond lost jobs. Stripped of work, men lost identity itself. While Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki grew richer, Norton's name became a hollow logo, bought, sold, and sanitized. The builders who once defied giants vanished into history, erased by balance sheets and corporate convenience. But legends have a stubborn way of surviving, and in small garages across Britain, the Rotary refused to die quietly. The Garage Keepers. Decades after the factory doors closed, a different kind of revolution took root. Not in corporate boardrooms, but in home garages. Across the country, small bands of engineers, collectors, and dreamers began resurrecting the Norton Rotary piece by piece. They scavenged parts from scrapyards, traded blueprints in online forums, and built entire engines from memory. What began as preservation became resistance. These garage keepers didn't see themselves as hobbyists. They were curators of a forgotten miracle. With every seal replaced and every rotor balanced, they were telling the world that innovation doesn't need permission. Some restored the legendary RCW 588 race bikes, polishing their metal until they gleamed like relics of defiance. Others built new interpretations, street-legal versions of the dream that once defied Japan's might. They work with the same stubborn faith Brian Crichton once had. Old hands, fading eyes, refusing to let genius die. When a Rotary roars back to life, its shriek cuts through time itself. At night events, flames light the streets, and for a moment everyone remembers. Some revolutions never die, they just move to smaller garages. Yet beneath the pride of those restorers lies a question that still burns hotter than any engine. A question about what we lose when progress becomes politics. The question that still burns. The story of Norton's Rotary isn't just about a machine, it's about a choice the industry made. Faced with proof that genius could come from a garden shed, the establishment chose control over innovation. It wasn't the first time, and it won't be the last. Every decade has its buried ideas, its silenced inventors, its small miracles declared unsafe or unprofitable. The Rotary is simply one of the few whose ghost still sings loud enough to be heard. Imagine the world if that technology had been nurtured instead of strangled. Smaller, lighter engines with turbine-like smoothness might have reshaped motorcycling entirely. The same principles could have crossed into aviation, automotive design, even power generation. Instead, the flame was smothered and the future was sold to the highest bidder. That's the real tragedy. Not that Norton lost, but that humanity did. The few remaining Rotaries that still start are more than machines. They're echoes of defiance. Their rising whine asks the question the world never answered. If one man in a workshop could build something that humbled the giants, what other miracles have we buried beneath comfort, politics, and fear of change? None. The story ends here, with the sound of a single Rotary idling in the dark, defying silence one revolution at a time. They said Norton's Rotary was a fluke, a mechanical accident that embarrassed the powerful for one fleeting season. But history remembers differently. It remembers the howl that silenced giants. It remembers a handful of men who refused surrender, And it reminds us that true innovation never dies. It's only buried until someone brave enough digs it back up again. The Rotary's ghost still hums, not in museums, but in the heartbeat of every rider who still believes machines should fight, not follow. So that's the truth they buried. Norton's Rotary didn't just beat Honda. It proved real engineering still lives in Greece, not boardrooms. The men who built it showed what happens when passion outruns profit. And even if the factories forgot, riders like us remember. If you respect stories like this, where grit wins over money, hit that like button and subscribe.